My life's why is just standing up for ideals and striking out against injustice. Stand up for ideals, strike out against injustice. And it's the lens to which every difficult decision I've ever made, it's the spirit that makes it all worth living and possible.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley, where we explore how midlife isn't a crisis, but a chrysalis, a time of profound transformation that can lead to the most meaningful chapter of your life.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis. It's Chip Conley here in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the MEA campus, the Rising Circle Ranch. I'm pretty honored that a guy as busy as this guy is joining me for this conversation. Gavin Newsom's the governor of California. He's somebody I've known for 30 years. I started mentoring him when he was a hospitality entrepreneur, and I was 7 years older than him. He was 28, I was 35. I spent a lot of time in room 200 in City Hall in San Francisco, partly because when I was mentoring him, he would come down to my offices in Union Square on Friday afternoons, and I would go to his offices in Cow Hollow of San Francisco. When he became mayor, I would go to room 200 on Friday afternoon, bring him lunch, and the two of us would have lunch and we'd talk. And I ended up coaching and working with his leadership team. I've done the same with in the governor's office. Was lucky enough to be invited to do a half-day retreat with his leadership team and his cabinet secretaries. And I've spent a lot of time with him over the years. And when he's been in hot water a couple times, he's come to me and spent 4 hours at my home, just like talking through some things that he needed to talk through. So I was really proud that, he's somebody that said, yes, I want to be on this podcast. I want to talk about my midlife chrysalis. I'll also say that one last thought before we get into the episode. People have heard my NDE experience, my near-death experience. That happened because I went to Gavin's bachelor party and broke my ankle playing baseball, and I got a cut on my leg, and my leg went septic, and I was put on an antibiotic, and I was allergic to the antibiotic. So if I had died, it would have been Gavin's fault. So I hope you enjoy the episode. I'll be on again at the end with some of my lessons from this episode. Gavin Newsom, my friend, welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis.
My God, I'm all the way out here in Sacramento, California, in Ronald Reagan's old building.
Yes,
Chip.
you are. Yeah.
Yeah, the old governor's mansion, haunted at times. We're not convinced it's the wind or it's the ghosts.
Well,
Decades past.
I think in some ways you may have more in common with Ronald Reagan than our current president does, but
Right? We could have that conversation.
You and I have known each other 30 years. About 30 years ago, your sister Hillary came to me and said, my brother doesn't know what he's doing. And she said,
That's how we're starting this. We're just jumping right in.
We're going straight in. We're going straight
30
in.
years. You could have said, she would have said that 30 days ago, but in fact, she said it 30 years ago. Maybe that's what we're going to discuss.
No,
today.
Don't worry. I'll be nice. But you'd started Plump Jack at age 25, maybe?
Yeah, around there.
And
I
started
just out of college, a few years out of college.
Yeah. And I started Joie de Vivre, another hospitality company in San Francisco at 26. So Hillary came to me and just said, maybe you can mentor my brother Gavin, and he can come down to your office down Union Square from the marina or Cow Hollow where you had your offices. And we started doing that. I remember there was a point at which Richard Branson had his book, Losing His Virginity. And you and I were in line. We were in line together at Borders Bookstore.
Yeah, man, we were like fanboys. We're so excited.
We were
so excited.
We were fanboys. And he ultimately wrote the foreword for my first book, The Rebel Rules.
That's awesome. And I finally got an invitation to Necker Island. So you and I, buddy, we made it in life. Awesome.
So what do people get wrong about you when it comes to your upbringing? Not your current life. We may get to that too, but a lot of people don't know your upbringing, and you have a book coming out next month that's going to really give a much more in-depth look at how you grew up. And give us the story.
I am coming out of the book. God, I know people are already rolling their eyes if they haven't already. A politician with a book, and I get that. But this book came out of place because so much of my identity has been shaped by public perception, but not the reality, the lived reality with a sister, just the two of us growing up with a single mom who came from no wealth, quite the contrary, and a broken home herself. And she was 19 years old when she was pregnant with me. She was divorced with two kids a few years later, and she had to make ends meet. Just grit, hard work. Didn't complain, didn't explain. My dad sort of had a panic attack of sorts, as he described it. Ran for public office as a county supervisor and lost. Ran for state senate a year later and lost, and was broke, in debt, and broke in, and decided just to take off to Lake Tahoe up near Truckee, California, and became an attorney there, and saw us episodically as we grew up. And so my life was shaped by that duality, the experience and expression of my father as he grew to appreciate his two kids a little bit more as we got older. And my mother just tried to, shaped everything in our life as someone just worked hard, 2, 3 jobs, literally 2.5, because she was always a part-time bookkeeper, part-time waitress, and did other work as a paralegal and periodically part-time real estate person. In that life of hard work and grit, her example, my dad's sense of idealism shaped who I am today. But it's a very different story than the one that's out there in the press of sort of this pampered prince, this slick guy, where everything was handed to him. And it's been candidly frustrating for me. And that's, I think, a big part of the why I thought it was important to write this book.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason people had that impression of you, was just because of your relationship with the Gettys, and the Gettys made an investment amongst a dozen other people who made an investment in your first business, and became very close with Billy. But I think that people don't understand the resourcefulness that you had to live, plus being dyslexic and being sort of behind. You're definitely touting your 950 SAT scores lately on
It's
some
960, buddy.
960,
Don't you for a
okay.
second. Don't I'm not one of those 950 guys. I'm a 960 guy.
So you're
Respect.
the book is called Young Men in a Hurry, and of course you're not a young man anymore, although it depends relative to the gerontocracy we have in DC, you are a young man.
Yeah.
Um, but, um, but the subtitle is A Memoir of Discovery.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what have you discovered about yourself over the past
Oh
few
my
years,
God.
Gavin? And what about life? I mean, like, what have been some of your discoveries?
Now, look, I mean, it's interesting going through this book and just a little bit of background on the book. I've had the privilege of being able to write a book prior about 15 years ago, and that one seemed more to type. I was lieutenant governor. Yeah, and it was about no notion of reinventing government, how to make, the town square digital. It was all around going social, local, cloud, crowd. It was about, I even wasn't big into AI then, but it certainly didn't understand AGI, notion of super intelligence. But it was this notion of the big breakthrough in the book was about we're going from search to suggest, and everything's being customized to you, and we need to individualize everyone's expressions and experiences.
Sounds really boring.
Yeah, exactly. So that was perfect to type, right? That's exactly what you expect.
Yeah. It
Of
was a
some,
wonk book. It was a wonk book.
yeah, it was a wonk book. And then I had a deeper privilege, and that was an opportunity to do a little picture book. I have 4 kids, and 2 of my kids early on were struggling with reading themselves. And I went out trying to look for picture books, not middle school books, not chapter books that talked about dyslexia and learning differences. And I couldn't really find any out there. And so it was one of those things that you've taught me, others, this notion of agency of, if you don't like something, then fix it, invent something, create something. And so I went out and I asked the publisher of that first book, would you be willing to do a picture book with me, a children's book about my own expressions of concern, of challenges with dyslexia, with a composite, a little bit of my story, and sports and how it shaped me. And they said yes. And so I kind of came out around this dyslexia closet in a much more formal way. And it was amazing just how it touched a lot of people. It wasn't the book was anything. It was just the fact that I was willing to tell my own story. And I met these kids and, parents saying, thank you. I wrote a letter in the back of back of the book is basically a letter to my mom who passed away 20 years ago. I get emotional even thinking about it. There's a schoolroom with the number, 4 numbers, and it's the date she died. So there's all these little things that I put in there just just thanking my mom because I never had a chance to thank her. I never had a chance to slow down and appreciate her. I didn't. I just, she was my mom and I needed something. It was a one-way relationship and I never fully absorbed her love and her example. And so the book gave me that opportunity.
Well, and let's give the name of that book. That book is called Ben and Emma's Big Hit.
Yeah, Ben and Emma's Big Hit. And it's just one of those nice little picture books and how yeah, it's a children's book, and anyway, it was wonderful, and Penguin published it, and it did pretty well, and they were sort of surprised. They didn't know that about my background. They just assumed again that I was an extended member, as you suggested, the Getty family, and somehow grew up with a silver spoon and trust fund. And so when I became governor, Penguin came back, said, "We'd love to do another book with you, a real book this time." And obviously, representing now, the time was the sixth largest economy in the world, now the fourth largest economy in the world. 2019, Donald Trump shaping so many things, Trump 1.0, and they thought it'd be an interesting dynamic, Trump, California. And so I started this process of writing the book, and all of a sudden, COVID hit. And then it was all put on pause.
Yeah.
And then I sort of came back, started writing again, year two, deeply writing about COVID experiences, reflected, trying to be honest, resourceful in terms of my mindset, not just, ideological, trying to be self-critical about it. And I submitted the transcript to the publisher, Ann Godoff, who's just, she's a goddess in the industry. And she was doing the editing herself, which was not easy. And I'll never forget, we went on Zoom, gave her the book, 3-4 years of hard work. And she goes, "Nah." I was like, "Okay." I said, I get it. I remember saying this, literally I cut her off, said, "Okay, I'll take out the chapter about my childhood. I know it doesn't." She looked at me, she goes, "That was the only good chapter." And I'm like, "What?" She goes, "No one wants to read about COVID." I said, "But I spent so much time on it." She goes, "No one wants to read about it." She goes, "I was fascinated by your mom and your dad and your grandma, and I didn't know, Trigger Addis, what a nickname. She was an actress in Russia, and, your dad's dad, and, I didn't know he's a cop. Your great-grandfather was a cop, and I didn't know about your father's relationship to the Gettys, and that is one part of your family, but not the entire picture." She goes, "I'd like to write that book." And so I went back for another 2 years. It's been a 5-year process, 6 years of writing this thing, and it became a memoir, and it was, forgive the long-windedness, Chip, it became a memoir discovery. I didn't know about my great-grandparents. I didn't barely knew about my grandparents. I didn't know about my dad, who passed away, who survived to see me get elected governor and then passed away shortly thereafter. And what motivated him, I didn't know the relationship with my mother. They didn't talk about it. It was really a book of secrets. And I was able to unpack all of this, and it explained more things in more ways, and it allowed me in that process to discover a little bit more who I am and open up and sort of crack this thing open a little bit in a way you've been demanding of me for 25
I
years,
have
man.
someone
Yeah.
back. I will tell you, back in the day when I was hanging out with you in in room 200 at City Hall in San Francisco frequently, someone once said to me, Karl Rove is George Bush's brain, and Chip Conley, you are Gavin Newsom's soul. And I was like, I don't know about that, but I
Yeah, they
I
were trying to find my soul,
I was
It
trying,
just
yeah, and I think, I wanna compliment you. I really do. You come across to many people as sort of slick and polished and blow-dried Californian, but for the people who get to know you, and especially in some of the podcast interviews you've done recently, as well as you as a podcaster, which we'll get to, you're a deeper person than people know. And I think it's partly because in many ways I think you had a little bit of a midlife chrysalis, which is the name of this podcast, which we're going to get to. But I want to go back to you being elected mayor at 36, and you were elected mayor by a slim margin, which was a bit of a surprise. You were supposed to be a shoe-in, and there was this Green Green
yeah,
Party
the
candidate,
original DSA back then, it was the
The
Green Party
DSA,
in my day, yeah.
Matt Gonzalez, and he, he had sort of the Zoran Mondani kinda, like, crowd
Yeah,
behind him,
100%.
and here's what you did. And, of course, I was with you along the way. You were on the board of supervisors before that. Within the first month, you did something that was quite politically deft, and that was you decided to tell the county clerk that they were gonna start issuing, for those who wanted them, marriage certificates for gay marriage. This is 2004, early 2004. This was the year when Gavin was not going to be invited to the Democratic National Convention to give a speech because of this. But I
No
want to go
chance.
back to that time because not many people knew this was coming. I was a little bit in knowledge of it, even though I was not on your staff, but I was sort of starting to, you know, embed myself, on your team a little bit. And what was it that led you to that decision to legalize gay marriage? And both the honesty of like saying this is what's needed, and you're way ahead of the curve on that one, but also a little bit of the political deftness of knowing you actually all of a sudden took all those Matt Gonzalez Green Party candidate
No, no.
folks and
I see where you're
brought them
going. Yeah,
over to your
yeah,
side,
yeah.
which talk a little bit about what was going through your mind at that time.
In the politics for me, I never thought in those political terms. I mean, I think, in history we'll judge that perhaps in the frame that you've referenced that it worked to build a bridge to more progressive elements, but that was never the design or intent. In fact, I saw the headwinds coming in a very different direction. It was vehement opposition from the Democratic Party, vehement opposition from people that I looked up to and admired, leaders in the LGBTQ community, not just leaders in the party proper, condemned me, many publicly and universally, all privately, saying, "What the hell are you doing? Who the hell you think you are?" And I'll never forget those confrontations and conversations where I was saying to those same people, "You were the one who always told me. You told me just a few weeks ago when I got sworn in, do what you think is right. You all sit there waxing on all that good advice. Be authentic, be your true self. And now I am." And you're like, "Who the hell are you? You didn't ask for permission." And for me, it was a big awakening about how politics works you know, and how policy also can shape people and events in history. But the history of this, just briefly, Chip, is I went out to the State of the Union with George Bush. It was his last State of the Union speech. And it was a State of the Union speech that was very memorable for many things. It was about Iraq. He was talking about steroid abuse at the time. It was a lot of the culture war stuff, so many things that we, identify with Trump today, but we're alive and well during those days, most assuredly. And then he began to unveil the final end of the tail end of the speech was about it's time for us to do a constitutional amendment to define marriage between a man and a woman, and everybody starts roaring. Everyone starts applauding, including the people that are sitting around me at that State of the Union. By the way, a State of the Union that I had the privilege of going to because Nancy Pelosi had invited me to Washington, D.C. as a new mayor, wanted to introduce me around to members of the congressional delegation, said it'd be a good time to come around the State of the Union because a lot of people were there. I wasn't expecting to go to it. I was expecting to watch it. And I went to her office beforehand for a reception, and she said, "Hey, you have any interest instead of watching on TV here in the office at the Capitol? Paul is not going, my husband, so I have an extra ticket." And I'm like, this would be amazing. So I went up, sat there in the rafters watching that speech. And here's what happened. At the end of the speech, we went back. Everyone had to give their cell phones beforehand. And so we're all waiting in line to get our cell phones. True story. I'll never forget a couple right next to me in line, speaking of you and I being in line. Now I'm in line and I hear this couple saying, "Oh, I'm so proud of our president. Wasn't that amazing, honey?" And he goes, "Oh, it was amazing. I am so sick." And I'll never forget these words. "I'm so sick and tired of this homosexual agenda." And I remember turning around going, when I heard the word homosexual, I'm like, whoa. And I never even introduced myself as some mayor of San Francisco. They didn't care. And I didn't even know what it meant to be mayor. I just was mayor for a week or so. And those words, true story, that moment, got my phone, dialed up Steve Cava, interestingly, my openly gay chief of staff, who, by the way, turned out to be opposed to what I did in the beginning, which is interesting. Walked outside, everyone's walking in one direction. I walked out because I couldn't get reception down the opposite end of the hall. I remember walking out. It was freezing cold night, and I basically was locked behind. I'm like out of the Capitol, calling Steve, saying, "We got to do something about it." And he goes, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "I don't know, but we got to do so." He said, "Well, you want a statement or so?" I said, "I don't know. I'll see you tomorrow." And that's when I got back home and came back to the office and started talking to my staff. And people were like, "No, you can't do this. What are you thinking?" Anyway, a few days later, we dialed downstairs to Mabel Tang, the county clerk, and said, "Mabel, who, by the way, worked for the Rainbow Coalition, worked for Jesse Jackson. I didn't know a lot of that history with her. And so she was a rebel, and now she had a new cause, and she was all in. She goes, I love this. I said, but how do you do it? She goes, this is easy. I'll just take the marriage certificate, says man and a woman, because it was on there. And she said, I can just change it to applicant 1 and applicant 2. I'm like, that's amazing. She goes, that's it. I said, I was like, yeah, I guess. She goes, that's all you need to do. I'm ready to go. I'm like, damn. And then it's sort of a series of events that unfolded with Kate Kendall, who came in to sort of said, take a deep breath, ran the National Center for Lesbian Rights and did a lot of legal work. And Joyce Newstat, people you know well, my office said, if you're going to do this, slow down. Let's do this right. You know what you're doing because you don't know what you're doing, but you know you don't know what you're doing, which means none of us know what we're doing. So if we're going to do it, let's get advisors. It's a legal issue. Let's not do this for pure performative purposes. And we called Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin. They're close with Joyce and Kate, and they'd been together close to half a century. They're the manifestation of faith, love, devotion, constancy, everything a marriage should be about. And Phyllis and Del in their late 70s, almost 80s, they said we would be honored to do this. And the idea was we would file a lawsuit, but we put a human face on it. And Mabel herself, our county clerk, would do the ceremony. I didn't do it. They would do it downstairs, and then we'd file a lawsuit. I'll never forget that day. Word got out, not that day, the night before, word got out that we were doing this. And the Department of Justice, Schwarzenegger administration, and the state, the governor at the time, Bush folks were like, we're going to shut this down. We're going to get a temporary restraining order. We're going to stop this governor's lawlessness or mayor's lawlessness before it happens. And the courts open. They were opening at 9 a.m. And we're like, damn, they're not going to let us do this. And then we realized, wait, I'm the mayor. I can open up City Hall a little earlier. So we got Phyllis and Del downstairs before the courts across the street were opening up at 9, assuming we would get shut down. And Phyllis and Del said, I do. Magical words. And 9:30 comes around, 9:45. We're still waiting for the court decision, all of us. And then the judge says there's no irreparable harm being done. And so he didn't do a TRO. I didn't even know what irreparable harm meant. Again, I'm a 960 SAT guy.
You're 36 years old as well.
Yeah, I'm like, geez, what's irreparable harm? Who's the lawyer here? And they said, and then we were confronted with about 24 other couples. They're like, well, if you could keep doing this, what about us?
Yeah.
4,036 couples later, 46 states from 8 nations in the not summer of love, the winter of love,
Yeah.
February 2004. And it was just magic. It was magic. It wasn't mayhem. It was love. It was doctors, nurses, firefighters. It was fire pilots, conservatives, liberals, people, human beings. Not one image they could exploit in the right wing. And it was just bliss. It was love. It was humanity.
Okay.
It was spirit, Chip, pride, the things you can't legislate.
I was
it was
there.
Beautiful.
It was one of the high points of your 7 years as mayor.
But Chip, I think it goes to, the spirit of this podcast. It's because it wasn't by design. It wasn't cynical. It was the right thing to do. And we just let it go. And, it was, it wasn't the convention I was kicked off. I mean, there was headlines, Newsom's toast. The end of it, my dad was furious, old Irish Catholic,
Dianne
all my old
Feinstein.
friends.
I mean, listen,
Feinstein, blame me for this. I mean, and these are all my mentors and friends and my family. And it was the Archbishop who said the worst mistake I ever made was supporting Newsom.
No, I know.
And they were marching and protests. And it was like, but then there's these moments of just of pure bliss and love. And one of them, just briefly, because I write about it briefly in the book. I didn't do any weddings. I didn't do any ceremonies. I mentioned Phyllis and Del. That first wedding was done by Mabel Tang. And about a weekend after, every day, you remember, Chip, all the loud noises of cheers and people, just lines around the block, helicopters, protesters, just the energy, the kinetic nature. And I'm hiding, sneaking in the back, getting in my office. I'm in a box and, just always constantly, but I'm removed. And finally I said, I gotta go. I gotta experience this. And I got 2 feet outside the front doors of the mayor's office. And true story, people come up and there's people getting married and like people come over and I'm saying hello. And then I get this tug, just this tug. And I'm like looking around. I'm like, who's this? And I look down and there's this little beautiful, precious girl. And she's hugging my leg. And she looks down. I can't, still think about it. And she literally says, she goes, as I look in her eyes, she goes, thank you for giving me two mommies, and hugs me further. And I just break down like I am now. And I will run back in my office and by myself, I shut the door just crying. And I'm like, oh God, like you talk about your heart being broken open, just changed everything, man, changed me. What a gift. What a gift to be part of that. What a gift to not just experience it, but to participate in that. And anyway, so that was a special time, man. Special stuff. Yeah, it's about people. Those things don't go away. Magical moments.
I don't even know what to say, but other than I love you. I just want to tell you that. If you're enjoying the conversations we've been having on the Midlife Chrysalis, I have a valuable offer for you to consider. My book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, is a national bestseller. And right now, you can get a copy for just the cost of shipping. It offers stories, research, and practices to help you move from a midlife crisis to a midlife catalyst and see this stage of life not as a decline, but an opportunity to flourish. Claim your copy today at meawisdom.com/midlife book. You talked about the winter, and in some ways, the winter of your political career was becoming lieutenant governor. So, for those who don't know Gavin, that people know Gavin as the mayor of San Francisco, and then the governor of California, which he still is. But there was this 8 years in between, which was your midlife crisis, your midlife chrysalis, your period of time when you had a TV show on Current TV, and you interviewed me.
Everyone remembers that. You didn't even have to bring that up because everyone remembers my
Al
show on
Gore's Current
TV.
TV, wherever that went. But what did you learn during that time, Gavin? Because during that time, it was your late 40s. It was a time that, frankly, is the U curve of happiness for midlife, the low point of midlife for many people. And you had a chilly relationship, but, friendly enough, but chilly relationship with the governor, Jerry Brown. He sort of has his way of doing things, and
Yeah, which is
you were
his
not
way.
his partner at all.
No.
What did
No
you
one
learn
was.
during that time? Because in some ways, sometimes it's that winter, that Siberia era, that actually forges some character.
Well, you're being generous. I had gone through some, self-inflicted wounds. I go through all this in the book, man. I try to be I hate when you say I try to be as open and honest, and presumes that everything else in your life is not, but I really went to great lengths to really open up and be self-critical and really reflect on my own journey and more substantively answer that question that you just posed. And that's quite literally a big part of this book is this process of becoming and discovery. And that's why it is a memoir of discovery, but not just the family, but ultimately breaking myself down. And that was a moment just of, it's temperance. I mean, I'm just no longer, the second I was no longer mayor, no one gave a damn. Like no one, like no one, no one, no one. Like my staff all moved on to the new mayor. The press that 2 days earlier was asking my advice or opinion or just thoughts on something could give a shit about my thoughts on anything. And you're just there alone. You got to go, and I'm just thinking, I'm going to be, trying to be mayoral and my mindset and lieutenant governor, and the legislature has no interest. Like, buddy, you're lieutenant governor, get out of our way.
Yeah,
Governor's like, no, we didn't run as a ticket. And so it was jarring. And it was 8 years. It's almost a decade of your life.
Which is really tough for a young man in a hurry. I mean, let's be honest.
I was always the young guy. I was the policy guy, the matrix. I was like 1,000 ideas, things. People would criticize me for too many ideas. I was constantly going. And mayors are doing 5, 6 events a day. There's weekends, like every weekend's a parade or something. And it's like, nah.
VIP to PIP. You became a PIP, a previously important person.
Yeah. And it was such a gift. And I didn't know it. What a gift.
It humbled you.
It forced me to slow down.
Slowed you down.
It forced me to look differently. I just had a new baby and figure out how to do the swaddle myself, like to actually fake that I can do more than one diaper a week. And, and they look and they say, "Oh, Jen, you want to, we have a weekend. You want to go to the park together?" And it was hard at first. It wasn't easy. I mean, it's my identity, man. It's my identity. And now no one gives a shit. And so much that, and so all of a sudden it just forced me to, I then became a husband, even though I was married, but like more deeply, father more deeply. And it allowed me to start to, take a deep breath. And what motivates me, what drives me, I decided to move my office into an incubator in South of Market in San Francisco with a bunch of startups.
I was
So I wanted to
there.
have
I'd come
that
visit you. Yep.
right? The founders den. And I wanted to have this sort of startup mindset because I was starting up again. And I said, I love ideas and policies. Maybe I can bring them out with this TV show, and reached out to Al Gore and Joel Hyatt, and they said, let's do it. And they gave me carte blanche, and, and Elon Musk on there the first time he unveiled the Tesla S. I had Sergey and Anne when they were still married with the early,
Google
the Google
glasses.
glasses where
Yeah.
they did it, with Marissa right before she announced at Yahoo, and Lance Armstrong, his last interview before he came out of the closet, on the steroid use, and Willie Mays. And it was just amazing. And I was learning stuff, Buzz Bissinger and people just that I never would have a chance to meet. And they all were saying yes. And then I just started to meet people and discover and learn, develop more wisdom and temperance. And then I'm studying Jerry Brown. It was a PhD in life and in policy too, in a different way. And it prepared me to run for governor, prepared me to be governor, and it's made me a better husband. I think a better person.
I would just say my observation, having spent all these years with you, is it made you a little bit less one-dimensional. It made you more humble. It helped you to see that you are not defined by your latest success, and that there's more to life. And so I wanna move forward though, and we tend to choose our politicians as the citizens, almost in reaction to the last one. We had Bush, then Obama. Then we Obama, then Trump. Trump, then Biden, Biden, Trump. It feels as if we're in an era, if we're gonna have a reaction in 2028 to the current president, that humility and honesty and grace. I've
Yeah,
heard you
grace.
say on multiple occasions, humility and grace. You've used those
Yeah,
words, and
yeah,
along
fills
with
me, of
some tenacity and resoluteness. I did
course.
some research on the resolute desk and where that came from, and it's a
Oh
fascinating
yeah.
story. It comes from the eight. Do you know the story? The resolute desk.
Oh,
The resolute desk is the White House desk for the president, and
oh, I know that.
it comes from the HMS Resolute that got stuck in the Arctic. It was a British boat that got actually then, in the 1880s or 1850s or something like that, and the US actually, got it out, and then Queen Victoria sent pieces of the Resolute boat to the US, and they built in Rutherford B. Hayes's era, they built the Resolute desk, which has been the desk of the president ever since then. So, it feels as if we have tough minds and tender hearts. What do you think the country needs in 2028 as the response to what we've had for 10 years of Donald Trump really running the Republican Party?
It's a great question. I wish Trump, after trying to light democracy on fire, try to break our country after January 6th, had more of the experience that I had as lieutenant governor and sort of reflected and went deeper. But he didn't. And in so many ways, he's a broken man that unsurprisingly continues to try to break this country. And it's manifested obviously in our politics, and certainly our approach to how we address that in terms of our social media, in terms of our sort of aggressive stance on a lot of policies. But at the same time, trying to sort of reflect, to your point, is, in the spirit of Isaiah, try to be repairers of the breach at the same time. But we're still in this fight, and we can't deny that is what Prop 50 was about, and getting involved in these redistricting fights and fighting fire with fire. It's not, you can't tie one hand behind your back with Donald Trump. You can't just try to win an argument as Donald Trump is consolidating power. It's not just about, positioning yourself or preening. It's not just about virtue signaling. This is an existential moment, and I think it requires a sense of fortitude. But the kind of grace and humility the moment requires as well. No, those two words have really spoken to me because I think this country needs it. We can't. I started this podcast. I appreciate you referencing it in an effort to try to see if I can build that bridge. I got a lot of criticism, and I and understood why. It was remarkable criticism from, by the way, some of the same exact people that interestingly criticized me when I did same-sex marriage in 2004. I should have paid more attention to that at the time. When I had Charlie Kirk on and Steve Bannon on, today we have Ben Shapiro, today, and I just I've said this a million times. Divorce is not an option. You got to define the terms of the future. Bill Clinton said that many times, but I believe that this notion we all want to be loved, we all need to be loved, we all want to be protected, respected, connected to something bigger than ourselves, and there's grace in that. There's humility. There's humanity in that. I married into a big Republican family. I love my father-in-law. I love members of his family that disagree with me vehemently. One of them actually helped support my recall campaign. Actually wrote $1 million check and tried to defeat Proposition 50. But I don't hate folks I disagree with. Try to do my best not to talk past people or down people. I'm not perfect in that respect. Back to grace, humility. But look, this can't continue. And so while I'm fighting the good fight, I'm participating in this. Shapiro and I went at it, in the podcast a little bit, where he said, you're flaming some of those fires as well. And I acknowledged a little bit of that. But I see on the other side of this, you reminded me, reintroduced me to the Serenity prayer. I'm deeply connected to, I'm finding the Stoics in my life, and, just this notion of we have agency, control what you can control, have the courage to fix things that are in your control, but also, things you can't. And the wisdom that comes from that and understanding the difference. And so, that all speaks to me. Maybe it's a time of life. It's also a state of mind now. And I think it's important.
Wow, there's so much you just opened up there. First of all, what I've seen in your podcast is that you are opening up the idea of the lost art of civil disagreement and the repair of the breach, Isaiah. The fact that you're quoting scripture and quoting the good book. I mean, it's like, this is great. That's something we need. I don't know that Donald Trump could do that, even though he's got the evangelicals generally on his side. But let's also recognize, for people who are listening to this or watching this, who are Trump supporters, Trump has gotten a lot of things right. He's gotten a ton of things right. When I say he's gotten it right, he's diagnosed the problem right. Sometimes his solution and his way of solving it is awful, but he's gotten some things right. But back to
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
So this idea, you're what I see you doing in the podcast, you're listening and trying to understand. You're being curious about why they believe what they believe.
Yes.
And then you also try to find some agreement on. I mean, you got a lot of crap in your Charlie Kirk episode for talking about trans rights
on sports
for kids in sports. And so when you have a growth mindset, and again, for those people who know MEA well, we were big fans of Carol Dweck's work at Stanford. And when you have a fixed mindset, with new evidence or theory, you're not going to change your mind. But with a growth mindset, you're open to changing your mind based upon new information, and you're interested in learning. And so what I see is you're open to learning and open to exploring new things. And I think that's what we all need from our politicians and from our leaders. It's also why I'm such a fan of some of the younger politicians. I mean, I've told you about Sarah McBride. I think she's got tenacity and grace.
Impressive beyond
She's
words.
incredible.
Wow,
I mean,
she's amazing.
She's the only congressperson from Delaware. She's trans, but she doesn't actually lead with trans.
No,
she leads with
she's
love.
incredible.
James
she's amazing.
Tallarico.
Yeah, he's amazing.
In Texas, running for
What a talent.
for senator, or Maria Glusenkamp Perez up in Washington. I mean, yes, AOC and Zoran are really interesting too, but there are a lot of talents out there who are showing tenacity and grace. And I just think, I just want to say I appreciate your podcast, and I appreciate you quoting Isaiah and talking about the repairer of the breach, and it's almost like the team of rivals. Doris's book. And talking about the Lincoln era, Civil War. And is it time again for a team of rivals for Gavin to actually bring rivals, others who you might run against for the Democratic side or the Republican side. It does feel like someone who can actually create that bridge is going to appeal to the broad moderate population.
Yeah, no, look, I appreciate that. And you may recall 3 of the people I ran against for mayor, I brought into the administration, from Angela Alioto, Susan Leal. For San Francisco listeners, you may remember some of these names. But look, I think that's incredibly important by definition. I mean, it's hard right now because I know everybody, just if we're getting a little politics, everyone wants to paint the positive alternative vision. What is the positive alternative vision? We know what you're against. We know what the Democratic Party's against. We've organized and we've unified around Donald Trump and our opposition. But what's the compelling vision where I feel included, seen, heard? I'm desperate to get there. I'm desperate to answer that question. At the same time, we're dealing with these existentials on a daily basis. I'm not sure we will have a republic as we know it if we are not even more forceful than we've been to date in the next days, weeks, and months. You saw today the president is exactly what I predicted a few months ago in an interview, is now talking about the Insurrection Act. You see the debate we're having in Greenland. I mean, it's just remarkable what he is achieving and advancing in terms of his agenda. And I think we have to be mindful of that. And so when I talk about grace and humility, I'm also trying to give myself a little grace because I want to be that guy. I want to be, in the spirit of Isaiah, I want to be on the other side of this as much or more than anybody does. But I also understand that right now we can't afford to hold a candlelight vigil. I mean, in the spirit of the church, as we pray, we have to move our feet. It's faith and works. And so that's why we have to get out on the streets. It's not just marching. It's legislating, it's hitting the courts, it's hitting the court of public opinion, ballot initiatives. I mean, this is profound and existential moment. And so, that's the dual. That's where I'm struggling with now, this sort of friction between these 2 points. But I'm looking forward, as we all are, to getting on the other side. And we have to. We just cannot afford another 4 years of this polarization. We can't.
Well, I think you mentioned the Serenity Prayer a few minutes ago, and yes, I did bring this up to you, and I did say, are you familiar with it? The Serenity Prayer, that 12, that's very popular in 12 step. It's on both sides of the aisle. This is not a Republican or Democratic thing. And God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's really a wisdom prayer. Let's be honest. Because it's got serenity and courage, but then wisdom is what actually helps you to understand when do you actually have to let go, and when do you actually and surrender, and when do you actually say no, we're not surrendering. And that's certainly the times we're in. Now it was coined by a guy named Reinhold Niebuhr. So Reinhold Niebuhr coined this during the early Great Depression. So we've talked about the Civil War and the team of rivals. We're talking about the Great Depression and the Serenity Prayer. It's during times where we are really tested, that we need to have something that we can hold on to. And my guess is that the Serenity Prayer is. I just hope that you advocate for it more, because I think it is what is going to build a bridge across the divide. And also Reinhold Niebuhr, David Brooks in last Friday's column in the New York Times had an article called an op-ed called "The Sin of the Moderates," and he quoted Reinhold Niebuhr again from Niebuhr's book, "The Children of Light and the Children of Darkness." And here's what he said. This is actually from Niebuhr's book. "The children of darkness are evil because they know no law beyond the self. But they are also wise, though evil, because they understand the power of self-interest. The children of light are virtuous because they have some conception of a higher law than their own will. But they're usually foolish because they do not know the power of self-will." So this is like what we're talking about, the left and the right now, virtuous signaling, and then, get the government out of our way because we need our rugged individualism. I don't know, Gavin. I think Reinhold Niebuhr is meant to be your patron saint.
I love it. I love it. And that wisdom, of course, is thousands and thousands of years old. It goes back to Epictetus. It goes back to Seneca. Obviously, anyone reads Meditations, Marcus Aurelius. It's so consistent, and it suggests perhaps maybe we should pay some damn attention to some of this stuff. And wisdom is what's lacking right now. Justice, temperance, all of these virtues. It's missing in our politics, certainly at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And look, again, back to, sometimes even in my politics, I'll acknowledge that. But it's this notion of, I love that, being open to argument, interested in evidence. And I said it earlier, but this notion of being in the process of becoming. And so, yeah, it's lifelong learning. But it's absorbing things and absorbing people and being challenged. And my God, it's so exhausting just sitting in our own, sort of silos and just reinforcing our own, cynicism and negativity and just I think it just dampens so much
Yeah.
of what life is offering you and all these signals that are out there that we just have to open up and pay more attention to.
2 last questions, my friend. First of all, let's go back to talking about discovery. What have you discovered anything about yourself being a father of 4?
When I was writing this book, I came across, it's not in the book, that great quote from Oscar Wilde, who talks about, the first order of life is to assume a pose. The second order, no one's yet discovered. And this notion of the pose, right? This idea, and I think about that in my life. I think about that in, those days as mayor, and we with this this performance that is our life, and how we curate it. And so this notion of the second half of your life, in the spirit of your podcast, this notion of, finding your true self, your authenticity. I keep doing this with my hands, but just sort of let it go, let it go. Like this, this notion of acceptance and accepting yourself and each other. And that's when you find grace, and that's when you find humility. And that's where I think the wisdom comes. And I'm finding that as a father, thinking, and I'm in the interactions with my kids and trying to just sort of distill that, in the way I teach them, the way I try to model behavior, not what I preach, but how I practice. And we all know that's how these kids, that's all they care about, is sitting here on my cell phone saying, get off your cell phone. That ain't going to work. And so just trying to become a better person so I can become a better father, husband, obviously work I do as a public servant.
What kind of path are you carving through midlife? Our free Midlife Pathfinder quiz helps you discover which of 8 archetypes best describe your approach to this stage of life and what that means for your next chapter. It only takes a few minutes, and your results may surprise you. Find out your archetype now. It's quick, it's fun, and it might help you see your journey in a whole new light. Take the Pathfinder quiz at meawisdom.com/quiz. One thought before the last question. You're in a hurry, but that's partly because you have like a holy urgency, a calling for what you're doing. But just remember, Gandhi said long ago, there's more to life than increasing its speed. Uh, and I actually think that over the last few years, you have learned how to just sit, just to find your pace. Find your pace. Last question for you, my friend, is wisdom bumper sticker. This is the question we always ask our guests at the last.
Oh, damn it. I should have prepared for
No,
this.
no, you don't need to prepare it because you're good off the cuff.
Oh, shit.
So if someone came to you and said to you, you know, Mr. Governor Gavin, what is something you've learned along the way that could it be summarized in a bumper sticker, a wisdom bumper sticker that has your fingerprints on it? And what's the origin story? When did you learn that? Because often our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom. And so it is often through the school of hard knocks that we learn it.
I'm literally processing in real time 5 or 6 different answers to that, because, I've faced recalls. I talked about some of those self-inflicted wounds that I write a lot about, where this notion of, the fact I'm still here is remarkable. This notion of resiliency, I think, is profound. The human capacity, this resilience. And I think that all of us understand that, or should understand that, in context of what we've all lived through, our life's passage through COVID and social unrest, and, all the things that are happening globally, and the anxiety we have around the peril and promise of new technologies, et cetera. And so this notion of resiliency. But look, I also was reflecting, I saw a Lucille Ball quote about the fact she, near her deathbed, said, "I don't regret anything I've done. I regret only things I didn't do." And I think about that too. And I think there's so much truth to that. Even the things that the mistakes I've made, it's forged a different me, and how fortunate I am in that respect. Even those things I deeply regret. I think that's something I think about for people and my kids. And look, just my life's why is just standing up for ideals and striking out against injustice. Stand up for ideals, strike out against injustice. And it's the lens to which every difficult decision I've ever made, business decision, even dumb things like screw cap wines, right? I mean, you remember that. Stand up for ideals, strike out against injustice in the cork industry. I think about it, in the same-sex marriage. It's a lens to which that decision's made. And life decisions, personal decisions. And so to me, this notion of justice, standing up for ideal, that's my mom and dad, both, and, that's you, Chip Conley, your mentorship over 3 damn decades. That's the joie in the vivre. Uh, you know, uh, it's the spirit that makes it all worth living and possible.
I really prize our friendship. I really care a lot about you. Thank you for, as busy as you are, making the time to have this conversation. I hope you found it
My honor.
nourishing in your own way. All right.
I did, and you always. God bless you, brother.
All right. Thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you for listening and watching this to the end. I I verklempt, to use I think a Joan Rivers word. I it's hard to know when you have a friend and somebody who you've worked with and known through thick and thin who becomes famous. Are they gonna still remember you? Are they gonna still appreciate you? And of course, over the course of time, I have found that Gavin has appreciated me even more and asked for my counsel and had me get involved as governor as he's been governor of California in a variety of ways. But to actually have this conversation was really powerful because when Gavin and I are hanging out, it's usually socially, or it's me trying to help him solve a problem, or working with his staff. But for me to ask the kind of questions I asked today, and to hear him answer poignantly and tearfully at one point in the interview, just gives me a sense of his humanity. And I really want to say, this is a guy who is perceived as Mr. Plastic, California dude, and there's more depth to him than and I hope this episode showed that. My first lesson is just be a rebel. You just go do the thing that you think you need to do. I mean, that's what he did with gay marriage. That's really his point of view on many things. The podcast that, people on the left hated because he was having people on the right on it. So many of the things he does, he gets, he has that arrows in his back, so to speak, because he's a pioneer. But he may make mistakes along the way. And one of the things I really appreciated him talking about was just regrets. He has regrets for personal decisions he's made along the way, but also some of the policy decisions he's made. But if you don't have regrets, you don't have a learning. You didn't learn along the way. And frankly, if you're not a rebel, and if you're actually doing things you don't regret, then you really never put your neck out on the line and did something that stretched the possibilities. So that's my first lesson. Second lesson, what's underplayed in his story is this lieutenant governor era of his. And I was there with him during those 8 years. And yeah, he had a TV show, but the lieutenant governor of California has almost no responsibilities. And it's true of many lieutenant governors. It's true sort of the vice president to some degree too. And your job is to be there in case the governor actually has to leave office. And for a guy who's a young man in a hurry, so to speak, to spend his middle of his life, the middle of his career, mostly his late 40s and into his early 50s, in a position where he wasn't doing much. It actually brought some humility to him. It helped him be a better husband and a better father. It helped him to be around to make the babies too. Helped him to actually have a startup mode around the government and write a book, Citizenville, and to actually literally have his office in a startup, founder's den in San Francisco, amongst other tech people. So that process certainly sometimes that it's that darker period, that midlife crisis, which is really a chrysalis, because on the other side of that is this opportunity to be wiser and maybe more humane in the process. And then finally, I'd say the third lesson was him talking a lot about politics. I mean, I'm sorry, a lot about religion and Stoicism and the Serenity Prayer and Isaiah and the Bible. And Gavin went to Santa Clara University. He went to a Jesuit university. He grew up very Catholic. And so he is somebody who actually has that in his history. It's hard to see it and know it because he strikes you sort of someone who might be a leading man in a Hollywood movie, not somebody who hangs out in church and talks to the archbishop. But I got that, and I also got the sense of, about how important he thinks for the sake of our future, we need to weave in some of the principles of religion and spirituality for us to actually be calm again and be friendly again and to love our neighbors. I also loved the fact he talked about Lucille Ball and regretting what you didn't do, and the social science research on this is pretty clear. The regret of something that you didn't do and wish you'd done is more than twice as painful as the regret of the thing that you did but wish you hadn't done. So I can tell you, I think that has a lot to do with why this man is running for president. I think the regret of not running for president would be a lot more painful than the regret of doing it and maybe not winning. So, what is it in your life that you could go out and do today or go out and start forging a path for that you're going to not regret? And as many people know, one of my favorite questions in the MEA, the Modern Elder Academy world, is 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? Think about that one. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Midlife Chrysalis, which is Wednesday. And it's Wisdom Wednesday, where I'll be having a great conversation with MEA's CEO, Derek Gale. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Chrysalis. This show is produced by Midlife Media. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform.